go ahead and start it off tonight with IP addresses. And if you've already mastered IP addresses, then good for you. This will be a good review for you. But for the exam, what we're looking for is for you to very clearly identify what kind of IP address it is, what class of IP address is it. And a lot of times you'll see anywhere from 2 to 5 questions in or around the different types of classes of IP addresses. So I was always taught whenever we start to talk a little bit about the Internet Protocol and the IP example, it's kind of like you're having a mailbox on the street addresses for your computer. And specifically, I remember when I was delivering pizzas while attending University of Florida, and even before that, it was quite interesting because you get to be so good at traversing in that particular case the network of streets in Gainesville that immediately when you turn on a street you look to the left, you get the street number. If it's odd on the left, you know that all of the odds are going to be on the left. If it's odd on the right, you know that all the odds are going to be on the right. And so it's very similar to being able to know your way around the network. How are you going to get there? Where's the address? Which way do you need to go? And it all begins here with the IP address. So a lot of times I think that people get um, confused because they may not be too savvy with the IP addresses, but currently many people um, saw the sky was falling and we were running out of IP addresses. But what ended up happening is we ended up creating this new one called IP version 6, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But most of the customers that we come in contact with are still using IP version 4. So, and specifically, we'll talk about that here in the on this slide. So with IP version 4, it's 4 octets or 32 bits a network address. And it's kind of cool because that means that you can define up to 2 to the 32nd unique IP addresses. 2 to the 32nd unique IP addresses. I'm not going to go and do that math real quick, but if you wanted to do it while I'm talking, feel free to put something into the chat window there, and you'll get a virtual high five from me if you can figure out what 2 to the 32nd is for the number of 32-bit IP version 4 uniquely identified IP addresses. So a lot of those IP addresses have already been used. And specifically, a lot of them are reserved for military use or government use, or many of the early fathers of the internet started to gobble up a lot of those internet addresses. And depending on this particular case, size does matter. And it's kind of interesting that the way that it's grouped here is in 1981, September of 1981, IP version 4 became the protocol for all internet traffic, and it has been and still is the de facto way to really assign specific addresses to corporations and or computers. So IANA, which is the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority, implemented a classful IP version 4 variation, and it is very interesting in the way that it classifies here using the different octets of the 4-octet 32-bit network address. So if you're confused, then that's okay, because we're going to go ahead and break it down a little bit for you here. In Class A, it uses the first octet. For the network, the last 3 octets are the host ID. The default subnet mask for Class A address is 255.0.0.0. For a Class B address, it uses the first two octets as the network ID and the last two octets as the host ID. That default subnet mask is 255.255.0.0. Class C is the first three octets are the network ID, and the last octet is the host ID. So the default subnet mask for that is 255.255.255.0. Usually we put Class D into what's called a multicast address, and specifically we'll talk about that at a later time, but for right now, this dotted decimal notation is what IANA uses to implement internet addresses. So check it out here. If it wasn't clear before, then hopefully it'll be a little bit clearer now. Class A addresses here, you can see that the first octet down here, 0 to 127, is used for the network, and then the host is used for the final three octets here. So there's up to 128 Class A domains. So that means only 128 companies or corporations or whoever can have those Class A addresses. So those were very popular when they first came out, but then they started getting gobbled up. So if you have a Class A address, you're in pretty good luck right now, because that means that your network is there's a few networks with a bunch of hosts that are underneath it. But if you were to ping something like Google, usually you see that into the 67 or 70 range of the network ID, and then it's got massive amounts of hosts underneath it. So again, the first octet is assigned for the network, and the other three octets are for the host. Class B, remember we talked about the first two octets in this particular case as the network ID, and the Internet Advisory Board here as IAB is someone who works with IANA, which is the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority, to make sure that people are adhering to this rule, this protocol for IP addresses. These are specifically show us the correct information per what we need to see given the class of address. And then here we'll just break down the Class C address, and the first three octets would be designed to default for specifically networks, and the last octet would be for the host. So one thing that I didn't say here is, check it out, hit down here at the last bullet, 16,777,216 hosts per domain for Class A, 65,536 for Class B, and 256 hosts per domain. You can see that for each one of these, the domains increase. For Class A, it's 128. Class B, it's 16,384. Class C, it's 2,097,152 domains. So the domains increase with the different classes, and the hosts decrease. So it goes from 16, almost 17 million, to 65,000 to 256. So with the different classes, just know that that is the difference between them. Class C has a bunch of domains that are out there, and specifically that's what that's for. A couple of different things that we always see show up on the exam are these right here, and I gave a couple of these on the pop quiz that I threw at you. Host address of all ones is called a broadcast. It's called a broadcast. So that would be something like 192.168.1.255. that would be a host address of all ones. So in the binary, it would be the last octet would be all ones. It would equal 255, and that's a broadcast. Essentially, a broadcast means that it's going to send out an all points bulletin out to anybody who's on the network to try to get a reply for something. A host address of 0 is reserved for the wire, and typically we see that like a 192.168.1.0, and then a / gets us into this thing that's called CIDR notation, which is classless interdomain routing, CIDR, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So these addresses are always reserved and can never be used. In addition to that, there's one other one. It's the local host, the loopback address, which is 127.0.0.1. And those are very specific things for IP addresses.